Hello to all my outies and innies, and welcome to today's new Severance video. This one's going to be fun because in this video I'm going to be trying to break down and do my best to explain the new opening credit sequence that just recently was introduced in season 2 episode 2 of Severance. This is going to be fun for me because I've talked about it before. I feel like modern television shows or miniseries have gotten away from creating memorable opening credits and just relegate the opening to background noise or placeholders while the viewer gets situated before the show begins. Now granted, not every show has the budget or even the time to introduce one, but I've always appreciated a great opening credit sequence in shows. Some that come to mind when growing up, some of my personal favorites are like Power Rangers or Doug, The Simpsons, Goosebumps, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and even X-Files. But even thinking about recent shows, I think of Game of Thrones, Succession, Stranger Things, hell, Peacemaker, and I would put Severance up there as one of my favorites of all time. To me, a great opening credits sequence of a television show can function as a condensed artistic statement, a pre-show appetizer hinting at the themes and complexities that lie ahead. With this new sequence, it plunges into the disorienting and unsettling world within Mark's mind, using creepy and strange imagery to explore the fragmented nature of identity, the implications of the severance procedure, and the sinister undercurrents of Lumon's secrets. So please don't take my thoughts or interpretations as fact. This is just my opinion of explaining what I think are some of the visuals being said here and being used to explain what's going on and how it connects to the characters and its story. With that said, let's have some fun and break down this sequence. Spoiler warning for the events that's taken place so far up until this point of the show. We open with what I assume is the any version of Mark, and moving forward, any version that we see wearing this outfit is the any version of the character, as we see him with his work badge on, with him sitting on the edge of a bed with his feet on carpeted floor. As he turns his head, he looks over at the severed elevator, which only has the option to go up, but as the door opens, in comes a balloon on Mark's head, similar to the ones Milchick gave him in episode 1 of this season, but we see the next shot here where it shows the balloon that came up, but we see this Mark going down. Now the room we find this version of Mark in, is it maybe an actual floor within Lumon? I know the clone theory has been debunked by those involved in the show, but this is possibly a level within the testing floor where the test subjects like a Gemma, or in this case some version of Mark, go to rest. Or could this opening shot represent a lot of this sequence with the idea of how outie Mark and any Mark experience their moments of life? One experiences their day-to-day life world, where the other Mark, any Mark, experiences the office floor of Lumon until he starts questioning what's going on and all the strange things he discovers when he breaks out of his normal routine of working within MDR. Now as we see this any Mark wanders off down a set of stairs with a flashlight in hand, we see other Marks with balloon heads floating around, and some look to be coming from the inside of his green brain, which I believe the green represents the green aesthetic from the MDR department. Now being inside Mark's brain here, we're watching the literal manifestation of what it's like to have an innie and outie in your head. Mark now walking around inside his head with some liquid substance around him. As he turns around, he sees a reflection run by. As we can see, this is Helly R running, but look under Mark and it looks like a reflection of Mrs. Casey, who runs in the opposite direction. The mirroring of the two women running in opposite directions suggests a possible conflict for Mark this season. Is this a literal depiction of a choice that he will have to make this season, torn between his innie's connection with Helly R and the outie Mark haunting memory of his wife Gemma? Now I'll mention this in my latest breakdown of episode 2, but what if there's a new storyline where innie Mark and Helly have their continued romance, but on the outside world, what if Helena pursues outie Mark trying to capture what her innie has, but of course outside Mark will be more concerned and focused on getting answers about what happened to Gemma and her being possibly alive. Now here we get a shot of a larger version of Mark sleeping while his innie points a flashlight at another version of himself in work clothes, as both of them are in shock of seeing one another. Now they find themselves back to back, which potentially symbolizes them being one of the same, as the camera pans out to once sleep Mark now awake, seeing the smaller versions of himself as he's surrounded by many almost baby-sized faceless versions of himself. As the shot continues to pull outward, we see this taking place within the inside of a severed chip going into Mark's brain tissue being pulled out by a Mark dressed in his work clothes. Now stick with me, I'm no doctor or expert, but I look at this whole section as what happens when a man and a woman are having intercourse attempting to make a baby, and the man's sperm is trying to attach to her egg and trying to create an embryo. Now in this strange example I just used, the intercourse is the severed process and the chip is the sperm in Mark's brain looking for an egg, hence the shot of the mini babies, and once there's a match, that's what comes of what makes the innie's personality. Now the shot of Mark pulling out the innie Mark could be another possibility this season of Mark trying to reverse the procedure and removing his chip. Now we see the dressed up Mark fall into a coffee mug with Irving's face on it as little white paper clips overflow as another version of Mark is sitting at his desk refining numbers. As you'll notice, he's faceless in the reflection of what may be the scary mirrors mentioned in the Lumon's listening video. This version of Mark turns around and you'll notice he has a goatee, which is a look we've never seen before on Mark. Could this be a look prior to the events of the show began, or maybe a future look of him, or again ties into my thoughts about the various different versions of Mark's any personality, and this is a look at one of them. Now this goatee version of Mark jumps away from his desk into Mark's head, which actually mirrors the same moments from the season 1 intro of Mark doing the exact same thing. Now as the Mark settles in, the shot turns into a painting, which then turns into the face of a goat, which turns into a mountain as the camera moves, as does the shape of the goat that's now being projected on a screen being held by two Marks on each side as a Mark watches. So let's go back a little bit and talk about the Mark jumping into the head again. To me, it represents the severed process of the innie taking action only at work in the physical body of the outie. Now the goat thing is interesting and just confirms whatever Lumon is doing down there with the goats that we briefly saw in season 1 and saw briefly in the trailer of season 2, all points to the goats being very important to the severance process and possibly to Lumon in general. We even have a shot of a goat wearing clothes, which just makes me think, are they maybe turning goats into the Lumon workers? And the last bit of the Marks holding the screen while Mark watches could represent the idea while innie's at work or when the outie is experiencing the outside life, the other version of you, while not having the knowledge of what's going on or what you're doing, it represents the idea of that version of you just sitting there watching as portion of your life passes you by as you watch. Now we see this version of Mark finds another Mark who seem lost and confused surrounding him while they're on what appears to be icebergs. Now the shot of the goat mountain and now these icebergs could be referring to the moment in the season 2 main trailer where we find the team wearing black winter coats walking on some mountain surrounded by snow. Wherever this location could be may be very important to this season. We see one of the Marks' heads balloons and their face disappears and detaches from their body, as does the other Mark surrounding him at the exact same time. Now you'll notice here in the corner that there's actually a car in the water. Now could that be Gemma's car after the accident that allegedly killed her? Now Mark uses the Mark balloon head to float to the top, again showing the process of Mark entering the elevator at work, and one Mark enters as the outie, but when he arrives at work, the innie arrives. Now Mark uses the Mark balloon head to float to the top, again showing the process of Mark entering the elevator at work, and one Mark enters as the outie, but then he arrives to work and the innie appears. As we see this Mark awakening at a table and his head deflates, we see a Mark dressed in work attire and pulls the chair back and lets them under a curtain to get carried by another Mark. Now backtracking to this shot with the table, it looks like this Mark has some alcohol and pills on the table and was in a really bad spot. Could the few moments be explaining what Mark went through after Gemma's death? Going back to that video projection, could it be him being told how the severance program works? We see the car in the water, maybe Gemma's car, and here we see Mark surrounded by alcohol and pills, taking his mind off of the pain of losing his wife. Remember back in season 1, we saw Mark drinking quite a bit, which as we know, he decided the best and safest way to not think about what happened to him in season 1, he wanted to go to work for Lumon, and for 8 hours, he didn't want to think about his pain. And going back to this shot here of Mark lifting the curtain up, is outie Mark essentially at work arriving and dropping himself off to work where his innie occupies his body for 8 hours. Now here we see Mark carrying Mark again. Again, this kind of represents in my mind the innie carrying the literal body throughout the day while the innie works without the burden of carrying his pain. Now here we see them at this place, which by the way can be seen in the trailer, of this grass land where across the way a Mark is doing the same thing as they're surrounded by the heads of Helly and Dylan. Now as the camera moves out, we see a Cobell who's watching them, which basically does what she does in the show, which is supervising them throughout the day as she has them in the book, and I think this book is representing the lessons of cure. Now as Cobell looks up with her face missing, we see Mark in her head or in her face, which to me can represent how Mark seems to be always in her mind, as he's holding a flashlight in the halls of Lumon and he begins to run away towards the dark and creepy hallway that Irving painted. As the final shots fiercely go down the hallway to the elevator that's going down, as we see Miss Casey in quick flashes of Helly as they're switching back and forth. Now we go back to seeing the first Mark, whose head is returning back to normal size on the same bed at the very start as he's looking around wondering what just happened. From here we see a baby version of Cure crawling on the ground with snow falling from the ceiling, which again just makes me think that something around snow, maybe again that's how Gemma died, maybe it was a snowy time of the year, but we see the camera behind him zooms into the back of his head as we see hands coming out and a face emerges as the title card appears. Which again, this last shot to me just represents what this whole opening sequence can kind of represent, which is the metaphor of what it feels like to be severed. So yeah, I love this new opening sequence. Like season 1, I will not be skipping this when it appears. Now there are some similarities between season 1 and now season 2 opening credits, but not to have recency bias, but I think I like this new one a little bit more than the original because it leans into the strangeness of the show and being in Mark's head and seeing his brain and the baby Cure and the goats, and the last shot of the hands opening in the back of his skull reminds me of the movie posters of Being John Malkovich, which by the way is a inspiration of the show, but also it reminds me of the reverse shot of the movie poster of 1992's Dead Alive. Again, I have a feeling that what we're seeing in this opening credit will be vital to what Mark goes through throughout this season. Again, we see him removing his severed chip. Will his innie and outie Mark be in a position where they have to choose between saving Gemma and Miss Casey or Helly R? And of course, the goats. What are the deal with the goats? Now, congratulations, you have made it to the end where your reward is a finger trap courtesy of Lumon. Thank you all again for watching this video. Please leave your thoughts, your theories, your interpretation of the opening sequence in the comments below. Please make sure to watch and support my latest breakdown of episode 2, and stay tuned for some more Severance video coming pretty soon. Now, if you all appreciate this breakdown, please hit the like button. Let's aim high for this and try to hit 800 likes on this video. Please also consider sharing this video, and if you love this show like I do and want to hear me talk about it more, and if you are new to the channel, consider sticking around, but also consider joining the channel memberships where some exclusive and early Severance videos may be coming soon. But also, I might add in a live after show and a watch party may be on the horizon. Now don't forget, you all are awesome, stay safe, and remember,
the work is mysterious and important.